My name is Ibrahim Traore. I am the president of Burkina Faso. But before I am a president, before I am a soldier, before I am anything the world can measure or define, I am simply a man who must live with his own conscience. Today, I do not stand before you as a ruler issuing commands, nor as a preacher offering absolute certainties. I stand here as a human being, sharing what I have been allowed to perceive. I speak to my Muslim brothers and sisters, to my Christian brothers and sisters, to the leaders of the Sahel, and to people across the world who still believe that moral clarity matters more than the noise of power. I did not seek the experience I am about to describe. I did not desire visions, nor did I wish to carry a message that would place doubt or unease in the hearts of others. Yet in the early days and months of 2026, something occurred, something profound enough that I could no longer return to silence. What came to me was not fear, it was not judgment, it was awakening, a reminder that power is fragile, that no nation is eternal, and that history is shaped not only by weapons or wealth, but also by unseen choices made in the quietest and most hidden places of the human soul. I will speak simply and honestly. I will not dramatize, I will not exaggerate. I will only share what I felt, what I saw, and how it unsettled me. Before we go any further, I ask only this. Listen not as supporters or critics, but as human beings who still know how to pause and reflect. The days when this experience came to me were not peaceful days. Africa, my home, was heavy with noise, not the noise of celebration or hope, but the noise of weapons, of mourning, of arguments so prolonged that their original causes had long been forgotten. During my waking hours, I was surrounded by reports, bombings, families forced to flee, children learning to recognize the sound of drones before the sound of school bells. Maps lay before me, marked with red stains spreading like infections. Every briefing spoke the language of strategy, yet behind every sentence were lives that would never be fully counted, never properly named. At night, when the final room was empty, silence did not bring rest. It brought images I could not drive away. I thought of how often Africa is spoken of as a problem to be managed rather than as a people to be loved. I thought of how easily violence becomes normal when it is described from a distance. It was during one such night suspended between exhaustion and wakefulness that the atmosphere changed. I drifted into sleep, and in that dream everything unfolded quietly. There was no thunder, no dramatic announcement. The world did not shake. Instead, everything became still in a way I had never known. I became aware of a presence, one that neither accused me nor flattered me. At first there were no words, only a clarity that passed through fear without denying reality. I recognized him not because he declared himself, but because peace arrived together with truth, not as an escape from the world. Jesus stood before me, not as an image from paintings, but as a presence carrying authority without force. His gaze did not search me. He already knew me. Africa, with all her wars and wounds, faded into the background. What remained was a clear sense that what I was about to witness did not belong to one continent alone. It belonged to the world. The vision did not begin with words. It began with distance. I saw the earth from above, not as borders and flags, but as a living surface, breathing and tense. Then the ground broke open in 4 places. 4 volcanoes rose, not suddenly, but as if they had been growing quietly for a long time. 3 stood close to one another. Their eruptions seemed coordinated, their ash clouds merging, feeding each other. The 4th stood farther away, isolated, yet no less violent. Fire poured from all of them. Not natural fire, but fire driven by intent. I understood, without being told, that these were not mountains. They were powers, large nations, systems with names we all recognize, though none were spoken. They were not evil in the way children imagine evil. They were disciplined, organized, convincing. What disturbed me most was not their strength, but their justification. Each eruption carried a reasoning that sounded logical. Stability requires control. Order requires force. Prosperity requires dominance. The ash was not only destruction, it was narrative. It blinded before it burned. I felt a temptation rise inside me, subtle and dangerous. The temptation to admire efficiency, to believe that if one gains enough leverage, enough influence, one could bend chaos into peace. It sounded reasonable. It sounded responsible. That is when I understood the warning hidden inside the image. Tyrants are not born from hatred alone. They are born from compromise, from small agreements made with fear, from decisions that promise protection today at the cost of conscience tomorrow. I realized how easy it would be, even for someone who claims to serve his people, to excuse harm if it arrives dressed as necessity, how quickly moral language can be replaced by technical language. Jesus did not raise his voice. He did not condemn. He simply showed me what happens when power stops listening. Then he lifted his hand, and the volcanoes went out as easily as candles touched by breath. Not destroyed. Stopped. And I understood that human ambition is loud but limited. After the fires were silenced, the ground beneath me did not calm. It tightened. I felt the earth strain, as if something deep inside it was being forced apart. Then a fracture opened. It was not a small crack. It was wide, violent, and deliberate. Roads split. Buildings leaned, then collapsed. Entire neighborhoods slid away from each other, as if pulled by invisible hands. I knew this place. It was not introduced to me with a name, but recognition does not always need language. It was a nation that speaks often about unity, while quietly rehearsing separation. A country where people live close together but imagine each other as enemies. A place where fear is profitable. I felt a heaviness in my chest, because the method was familiar. This destruction did not come from bombs falling from the sky. It came from voices, from repeated messages, from narratives that reduced neighbors into categories. Again, the temptation came. It whispered more softly than before. Division, it said, can be managed. A fractured people are easier to govern. Conflict can be redirected. Power can be stabilized by keeping groups suspicious of one another. History is full of examples. It sounded strategic. It sounded realistic. Inside me, another voice argued back. It asked whether stability built on distrust ever lasts, whether leadership that depends on fracture does not eventually fracture itself. I felt the tension of that argument inside my own body. I thought of moments when I had been tempted to simplify problems by assigning blame rather than responsibility. I thought of how comforting it is to believe that disorder is caused only by others. Jesus placed both his hands over the Leah. There was no force, no dramatic gesture. The ground responded as if it had been waiting. The crack closed. Not erased, healed. I understood then that unity imposed by control is fragile, but unity restored by truth can endure. And I also understood that no leader is immune to the temptation of division, especially when fear demands quick solutions. When the earth was made whole again, I believed the vision might end. Instead, the sky changed. Darkness gathered not like night, but like intention. Clouds thickened, layered upon each other, heavy with moisture and electricity. Lightning did not strike randomly. It traced patterns. Thunder rolled with rhythm, as if responding to commands I could not hear. Rain fell in violent sheets. Rivers swelled beyond their memory. Winds tore across cities that had never prepared for them. Weather no longer behaved like creation. It behaved like a tool. I understood that this storm was not judgment. It was consequence. Humanity had reached upward, not in prayer, but in control. The air itself had become an experiment. Systems designed to predict had moved toward systems designed to manipulate. What began as curiosity had grown into confidence. Confidence had become arrogance. The temptation here was different, but no less dangerous. It said, if we can manage the sky, we can protect the people. If we can control climate, we can prevent suffering. If we do not act, chaos will win. It sounded compassionate. It sounded urgent. But beneath that reasoning was a quiet refusal to accept limits. I felt an unease I had not felt before. Not fear of the storm, but fear of the mindset that created it. A mindset that believes intelligence alone grants authority, that data replaces wisdom, that outcomes justify intrusion. I examined myself in that moment. How often had I trusted systems more than discernment? How often had I believed that good intentions were enough to excuse overreach? Jesus did not accuse humanity of seeking knowledge. He did not condemn innovation. Instead, he revealed the cost of forgetting humility. He breathed gently as one exhales after grief. The wind softened. The clouds thinned. The storm began to lose coherence. But before it disappeared completely, I saw the damage left behind. Flooded homes, lost harvests, displaced families, not because correction had failed, but because warning had been ignored. I understood then that intervention does not erase responsibility, and that even mercy allows consequences to teach what pride refuses to learn. After the storm weakened, there was a silence unlike any I had known. It was not emptiness. It was fullness without noise. In that stillness, I became aware that the vision was not only about nations or systems, it was about the human heart. I did not hear thunder. I did not hear commands. What came instead was understanding, clear and unforced, as if truth no longer needed to argue for itself. I understood that God had not surrendered his place, not to technology, not to ideology, not to empire. Human beings can imitate creation, but they cannot replace its source. We can rearrange matter, but we cannot invent meaning. What struck me most was this. Fear did not come from God. Urgency, yes. Gravity, yes. But fear belongs to those who know they are overreaching and sense the limits closing in. I realize how often leaders, including myself, confuse anxiety with responsibility. We tell ourselves that constant pressure proves our seriousness, that sleeplessness equals virtue, that control equals care. Yet the message was simple. God still acts through people, but he does not surrender action to people. Partnership is not replacement. Service is not ownership. I saw how easily faith can be used as decoration rather than discipline. How language about God can become a shield against accountability instead of a call to it. I felt a quiet shame at moments when I had spoken about values while negotiating away their substance. This was not condemnation, it was correction. I was shown that prayer does not change God's will, but it does shape timing. That humility can delay destruction, that repentance can narrow the path of suffering. And I understood something deeply unsettling and deeply hopeful at the same time. God does not panic. That realization alone changed how I see power. The vision did not end with explanations, it moved closer to me. I was shown moments that did not belong to the future of nations, but to the daily interior life of a leader. These were not dramatic scenes. They were quiet rooms, private conversations, decisions made when no one is watching. The first temptation appeared as protection. I saw myself being offered stability in exchange for silence. Not betrayal in the obvious sense, but restraint. I was told that some truths create unnecessary panic, that some injustices are too complex to confront publicly. That waiting is sometimes wiser than speaking. The argument was strong. It appealed to responsibility. It spoke of preserving lives, of avoiding chaos, of choosing the lesser harm. I felt the weight of it. I felt how easily moral clarity can be delayed by fear dressed as prudence. The second temptation appeared as efficiency. I was shown a path where results came faster by bypassing consultation, by reducing transparency, by concentrating decision-making in fewer hands. It promised speed. It promised order. It promised praise from those who value outcomes over process. I felt the conflict inside me. I knew how slow justice can be. I knew how exhausting participation is, and I knew how tempting it is to believe that good intentions excuse hardened methods. The third temptation appeared as loyalty. I was shown allies who demanded agreement not because they were right, but because they were useful. They asked me to overlook certain actions, to soften certain words, to remember who stood with me when things were difficult. The reasoning was persuasive. Politics, it said, is about survival. No one governs alone. Compromise is not corruption. This is how the world works. And yet, beneath each temptation was the same quiet danger. Each one asked me to trade integrity for comfort. Each one offered short-term stability at the cost of long-term truth. None of them required hatred. None of them required cruelty. They only required gradual surrender. That is when I understood the deepest warning of the vision. Evil rarely arrives demanding everything. It begins by asking for a small exception. At this point in the vision, I wanted instruction, clear rules, a list I could memorize and apply. What I received instead was something more difficult. I was shown power not as a throne but as a weight. It rested on the shoulders, not the head. It pressed downward every day, whether one acknowledged it or not. I understood that power is not proven by what it can force, but by what it refuses to do. That authority is not revealed when people obey, but when restraint is chosen even though disobedience could be punished. A truth settled inside me that was uncomfortable because it was simple. You cannot serve justice and power at the same time. When power demands silence, one will eventually ask the other to kneel. I saw moments from history where leaders believed they were temporary exceptions. They told themselves they would compromise now and correct later, that they would bend the rules only until stability returned, that they alone could manage the contradiction. None of them planned to become tyrants. They became tyrants because they confused intention with outcome and patience with permission. I was forced to confront my own failures. Words I softened, delays I justified, decisions I framed as unavoidable when they were, in truth, uncomfortable. I saw that righteousness is not lost in one dramatic fall, but in a series of rational choices that slowly train the conscience to sleep. There was no accusation in this realization, only clarity. I was shown that moral choice is not a single heroic act. It is repetition. It is waking up each day and choosing again, even when yesterday's choice brought criticism, loss, or isolation. Service, I learned, is not proven by sacrifice alone, but by consistency, and the price of justice is not paid once. It is paid daily, quietly, without applause. As the vision drew closer to its end, something fundamental within me changed. I was no longer standing at a distance, watching events unfold like a spectator studying history from afar. I was no longer interpreting symbols or searching for explanations. I was exposed, not exposed to the world, but to myself. I realized then that much of my prayer life, though sincere and disciplined, had quietly carried a hidden hunger. I had not noticed it at first, because it wore the language of devotion. I prayed often, but beneath those prayers lived a desire for reassurance. I wanted confirmation that my intentions were pure. I wanted signs that my sacrifices were seen. I wanted evidence that the path I had chosen would one day justify itself in the eyes of history. I wanted to know that all of this suffering would eventually be understood as necessary. What I was given instead was not reassurance. It was an invitation to humility. In that moment, I no longer saw myself as a president. I did not see a uniform, a title, or a role assigned by circumstance. I saw a man who will one day stand without advisors, without applause, without explanations prepared in advance. A man who will answer without titles. I felt the weight of Africa's hopes resting on my shoulders, heavy and real. But I also felt something else just as clearly, the limits of my strength. For the first time, I understood that leadership does not excuse dependence on grace. It demands it. There is a lie that power tells those who carry it. It whispers that responsibility replaces humility. That authority reduces the need for mercy. That being necessary makes one sufficient. That lie fell away. I asked Jesus not for success, not for victory, not for protection from enemies or vindication against critics. I asked for mercy. Mercy for the times I mistook resolve for righteousness. Mercy for the moments I chose silence because courage felt too costly. Mercy for the pride that hides itself even inside those who speak earnestly about justice. I asked for Africa, not for dominance over others, not for revenge against history, not for the illusion of instant transformation. I asked for healing. Healing for nations tempted to replace old chains with new ones. Healing for leaders who speak the language of liberation while practicing the habits of control. Healing for people who have been taught too often that dignity must be borrowed, imported, or enforced through fear. I ask for those who rule and for those who protest. For those who still believe change is possible, and for those who have quietly given up believing that either side truly listens anymore. I ask that we would be spared from leaders who believe themselves indispensable. There was no promise that suffering would end quickly. No illusion that wisdom would suddenly become fashionable. No guarantee that repentance would erase consequence. But there was assurance. Assurance that repentance still alters direction, even when it cannot reverse damage. Assurance that humility still restrains destruction. Assurance that mercy still interrupts cycles that pride insists must continue. The final understanding came without drama. It was quiet. It was firm. It was unmistakable. Grace is not weakness. Grace is the courage to remain human in systems that reward hardness. And leadership at its best is the refusal to surrender that humanity. When the vision ended, I did not wake with excitement. I woke with sobriety. Nothing outside my window had changed. The same conflicts continued. The same arguments waited. The same expectations pressed in, impatient and unrelenting. Yet something within me had shifted in a way I could not undo. I understood then that what I had been shown was not a prediction meant to impress, nor a warning designed to terrify. It was a mirror held not only before nations and institutions, but before my own soul. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I say this with respect and sincerity. Humility before God is not weakness. It is the recognition that no ruler, no system, no ideology can claim authority that belongs only to the Creator. Submission to God must always produce restraint toward people, or it is not submission at all. To my Christian brothers and sisters, I speak plainly. Faith that does not shape conscience becomes decoration. The teachings of Jesus are not a refuge from responsibility. They are a demand for it. He does not call us to escape the world. He calls us to refuse becoming its cruelty. To the leaders of the Sahel, and to all who carry authority anywhere, I speak as one who struggles daily. Power will test you most when you are convinced your cause is just. It will whisper that urgency excuses excess. It will insist that results matter more than methods. It will flatter you by telling you that you alone can hold everything together. Do not believe it. The world does not collapse because of a lack of strong leaders. It collapses because of a lack of accountable ones. Moral failure rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with banners or warnings. It arrives as fatigue, as rationalization, as the slow normalization of what once disturbed us. That is why vigilance is not paranoia. It is discipline. I do not stand before you claiming victory. I do not offer myself as an example to be followed. I am still learning. I am still correcting. I am still tempted. Each morning I wake knowing that yesterday's integrity does not protect me today. Yesterday's courage does not guarantee today's clarity. The work is not finished because it is never finished. What gives me hope is not the belief that disasters can be avoided completely. It is the knowledge that they can be limited, that arrogance can be interrupted, that division can be healed before it becomes irreversible. Prayer, humility, and repentance still affect the direction of history, even when they do not control its speed. I believe that God still intervenes, sometimes through people, sometimes despite them, sometimes by allowing consequences to teach what warnings could not. I also believe this: fear is not the final word. Fear immobilizes. Awareness awakens. The purpose of what I have shared is not to alarm you. It is to invite you into attentiveness. If you are a leader, examine the small compromises. If you are a citizen, guard your conscience as carefully as your rights. If you are tired, do not surrender your moral sense for the comfort of certainty offered by others. The world does not need more certainty. It needs more honesty. I will continue to govern. I will continue to make imperfect decisions. I will continue to fall short of ideals I still believe in. But I commit myself to this, to choose restraint over dominance, truth over convenience, service over legacy. Each of us is faced with the same quiet test, regardless of position. Every day I wake up and I must choose again. There is no final victory, only vigilance or surrender. If these words have caused you to pause, to reflect, or to quietly question your own assumptions, let that reflection continue. Stay present, stay engaged. Remain part of the conversation that still believes conscience matters. And if you wish to walk with me in that ongoing reflection, to listen, to question, and to remain awake together, then remain close. The work is not finished, and none of us should face it alone.